Let's work some magic with leftover fabric and batting. These pouches feature beginner-friendly zipper installation and fold flat for easy storage. But they have a secret superpower, a gusset that creates a roomy interior with a wide, stable base. And they're easy to make in different sizes. In addition, I'm going to show you two different ways to make these pouches. We'll start with a simple one-piece fabric version and then move on to my favorite patchwork version with decorative stitches. I'll also share measurements for both my sample pouches throughout this tutorial. Hi, I'm Beth Ann. I'll be working from this pile of leftover fabric and offcuts of batting. I'll also use a bit of 1-inch wide ribbon, a zipper for each pouch, and of course, some cotton thread. That's it. I'll be building on techniques from the Sew Simple with Rectangles and Squares book by Nancy Zieman, but won't be using a specific pattern. These bags are very customizable. You can choose a size and technique that appeals to you. I especially enjoyed playing with some optional decorative stitching. One quick but important note before we begin: these layers will be thick. You'll need a walking foot or a dual feed system for your sewing machine. Or if you have a serger, that would work too. Let's start with the single fabric option for the outside of the pouch. I've layered my lining fabric right side down, then the batting, then my outer fabric right side up. Quilting these layers together will help give the pouch structure. My quilt sandwich here is roughly 12 inches by 16 inches. You can go larger, but I would avoid going smaller if these techniques are new to you. You'll see why later. The quilting doesn't need to be fancy. Here I'm marking chalk lines about 1.5 inches apart, starting from the middle of the fabric. I'll continue until I have vertical lines marked the whole way across. I happen to be using fusible batting, but you can use basting spray or pins as needed to keep the layers from shifting. You can absolutely use a straight stitch to quilt this fabric, but I'm going to use the same serpentine or wavy stitch that I used in this previous video. Here's how I set this up on my machine. I selected the serpentine stitch with a width of 4.5 and a length of 2. I'm keeping the chalk marks lined up with the center mark on my presser foot as I stitch. My white cotton thread is disappearing into the fabric on camera, but it's still giving me lovely, subtle texture. After the quilting is complete, it's time to trim. For my small pouch, I trimmed the fabric to 11 inches by 15 inches. If you're only interested in the single fabric option, you can skip ahead. But if you're sticking around, let's talk simple patchwork options. I chose to not cut into any new yardage for my pouches. I used all leftover fabric, but you can certainly start with new fabric if you prefer. I sewed 2 pieces of fabric together for my lining. You can see where the seam is. That's just because my fabric was too small. My base is roughly 15 inches by 22.5 inches, but you don't have to stick to these measurements. Again, I happen to be using a fusible batting, but you can use basting spray or pins as needed to keep the layers from shifting. I'll be centering the first strip on the fabric and working outwards, quilting as I go, which is a lot easier than it may sound. But first, I'm using a ruler to make sure my strip is nice and straight and even. I'm pinning carefully down the center of the strip, just enough to keep it from wiggling as I add the next set of strips. The next set are 1.25 inches wide. I'll place them right sides together on either side of my original strip, and then pin and sew with a 1/4 inch seam allowance. There we go. Ready to pin. Here I've flipped the strips open and pressed them. A quick reminder, don't let your iron touch your batting if you're using a fusible. Now I'm ready to add my next set of strips. These are 2.5 inches wide, but remember, you can use any width that you like. This is the last set of strips that I'll be adding. They're 4 inches wide since that's what I had. Once I get both strips in place, there we go. I'll use my ruler to make sure everything is still straight and even before I pin and sew them. And here we go. If I turn it over, you can see the Quilt-As-You-Go stitching lines go all the way through to the back. Since I don't want the outer edges of the 4-inch wide strips to come loose or flop around later, I'm also running a line of straight stitches down the outer edge on each long side. I'm being careful to stay inside the seam allowance so that the stitching will be hidden later. Technically, we have enough quilting lines to support the bag, but I love playing with the decorative stitches on my machine. I'm switching from my 50-weight all-purpose cotton thread to 2 different colors of 40-weight polyester thread since I enjoy a bit of shine. But like so much else today, the switch is optional. Cotton will work just great. I'm going to use 2 stitches that you might recognize. I featured both in the machine applique video tutorial. If you'd like to check that out too, I'll link at the end, after you finish this video, of course. I'm starting with a feather stitch. No worries if you don't have it. You can swap it out for something different. Here's how I set my feather stitch up: 4 for width and 2 for length. This will create a narrow stitch, which is what I want for the narrowest strips that I used. Here's what it looks like in progress. I'm lining up my seam line with the center mark on my presser foot. It's kind of mesmerizing, isn't it? And here's how it looks on those narrow strips. I'm really pleased. I'm switching to what my machine calls hem stitching for the wider strips. I'm using a width of 6 and a length of 2. I'm keeping the seam lined up with the center mark on my presser foot. This stitch will be noticeably wider than my feather stitch. And here we are. I like how the darker thread looks on the darker fabrics, although I will say it shows up better in person than on camera. The next step is trimming. Here are both sizes trimmed and ready to go. I've included my measurements on screen for your reference. Okay, since we're working in the style of Nancy Zieman and keeping things simple, we're not going to insert a separate lining or add binding to the inside side seams, but we do want to finish those edges on the inside of the bags, so in comes overcasting. You can use a serger if you have one, but I'm using my sewing machine. Here's what my overcasting stitch looks like: a combination of a straight stitch and a zigzag stitch. If you don't have a stitch like this, a simple zigzag will work just fine. I've set my stitch width to 4 and my length to 2 so that I know that this stitching will stay in the seam allowances. Here we are in progress. I've switched back to my original cotton thread. This time I'm lining the fabric up so that the zigzag part of the stitch wraps around the outer edge of the fabric. Here's what it looks like from the front, and here's what it looks like on the back. Now we're ready to add the ribbon tabs, those little loops that you can hold on to while pulling the zipper tab to open or close the zipper. I'm using 1-inch wide grosgrain ribbon. I'll need 2 3.5-inch long pieces of ribbon for each pouch. One at a time, fold each piece of ribbon in half and line up the cut edges of the ribbon with the outer edge of the fabric. The top edge of the ribbon should be 1 inch from the top edge of the fabric. Pin in place. Here are all 4 ribbon tabs folded and pinned, ready to sew. Staying inside the seam allowance, stitch back and forth across the ribbon 3 times, backstitching or locking your stitches at the beginning and end. And here we go. It's looking good. Now we're ready for the zipper. We'll be using Nancy Zieman's method as I think it's awesome. We'll start with an all-purpose polyester zipper that is longer on each side than the pouch fabric. That way we don't have to worry about accidentally hitting any of the metal bits on the ends of the zipper. On the back side of the zipper, we'll draw a line across each end to show where the edges of the fabric will be. It may be a little hard to see my lines here, so I've added red ovals around them. We're going to set up a zigzag stitch to create a bar tack. I set my width to 5 and my length almost down to 0. We'll stitch the open end of the zipper closed by going back and forth several times. This stitching will make it easier to keep the ends of the zipper aligned together through the next few steps where the zipper will need to be partially unzipped. Okay, here's a quick reminder of how we marked the back side of the zipper. Now we'll cut 2 3-inch squares of fabric for each zipper. We'll use 1 3-inch square on each end of each zipper. Place the zipper wrong side down onto the right side of the fabric. That means that the zipper pull should be facing the table. The zipper should be centered on the square, with the outer edge of the square lined up with the marked line on the zipper. Fold the square in thirds so that it wraps around the zipper. Pin it in place. I like to use 2 pins for this. Mark a line 1 inch in from the outer edge of the fabric square. I've darkened the line in the photo to make it easier for you to see. Unzip the zipper to get the zipper pull out of the way and repeat the process on the other end of the zipper. This is where the bar tack really comes in handy. The zipper should come together neatly when you wrap the fabric square around it. Pin in place. Once again, mark a line 1 inch in from the outer edge of the fabric square. I've darkened my lines again to make them easier for you to see. Stitch across each of the marked lines. I like to do it 3 times so that the seam will be nice and strong. Backstitch or use a locking stitch at the beginning and end. Here's what it will look like. Cut off the excess zipper 1/4 inch past each stitching line. Okay, this next part is my favorite. Pull the wrapped fabric down and away from the zipper. There's no need to worry about the raw edge on the back side of the zipper. It should be enclosed in an upcoming seam. There, both ends of the zipper are now ready to go. Just to keep things nice and tidy, I like to add a bit of top stitching, back stitching, or using a locking stitch at the beginning and end of the seam. I've added a black stitching line over the top stitching so that it will be easier for you to see. Here we go. The zippers are ready to insert. Center the zipper along the top edge of the pouch fabric, right sides together, lining up the long upper edges carefully. I'm using clips to hold it in place, but you can pin if you prefer. We'll use the same method for both size pouches. I'm sewing the zipper down with a 1/4 inch seam allowance, still using my walking foot, and a straight stitch. Stop when you near the back side of the zipper tab. Here's how we'll get around it. First, lift the presser foot, then rotate the fabric slightly so you can reach in and grab the tab, and then pull the tab past the presser foot. Then you can straighten out your fabric again. Resume stitching until you get to the end of the zipper. For a nice finish, flip the zipper open, press the fabric away from the zipper, and top stitch parallel to the zipper. Here's what that looks like. The top stitching should catch the zipper on the underside of the fabric and hold everything nice and flat. Clip or pin the other side of the zipper to the other end of the fabric. This will create a tube. Sew again with a 1/4 inch seam allowance. Stop when you approach the back side of the zipper tab and unzip the zipper to get it out of the way. Continue sewing the zipper in place. Turn the tube of fabric right side out and press the fabric away from the zipper again. I think this final top stitching is the trickiest part of the whole process. We want to top stitch next to the zipper without catching the fabric on the other side of the tube. We'll need to reposition the fabric as we go to make sure we're stitching just along the zipper without catching any additional fabric in the seam. This step is easier on larger pouches since there's more room to maneuver. And here we go. Our fabric tube is still open on the short ends, but the zipper is installed. Okay, let's stop for a sec to talk about smaller pouches. There's less room to maneuver on a small pouch so you might find the top stitching step a little challenging. If you're really getting stuck, you might find it helpful to top stitch from the beginning to the middle in one direction, lock the stitches, and then switch things around and stitch from the end to the middle, locking your stitches where the lines meet up. Here's what that looks like. But remember, this is your pouch. You can also choose to skip the top stitching next to the zipper, especially if you're making small pouches. Personally, I like the way the top stitching looks, but it's more important that you end up with a finished pouch. Okay, everybody take a breath. The tricky part is done, and we're ready to sew up the sides. Turn the tube inside out and unzip the zipper halfway. Flatten the tube with the zipper centered at the top. Create the gusset by folding the tube up the desired amount. This again is customizable, since the base of the fully opened pouch will be twice the width of this fold. The fold for my large pouch is 3 inches wide, which means it will be about 6 inches wide when the finished pouch is fully open. The fold for my smaller pouch is 2 inches wide, which means the base will be about 4 inches wide when the pouch is fully open. Since these layers are so thick, I like to temporarily lengthen my straight stitch from 2.5 to 3. I'm stitching with a generous 1/4 inch seam allowance, enough that I'm safely past those overcasting stitches. For easier sewing, I always start stitching a few threads in on the fold on the bottom of the pouch, backstitching or locking the stitches at the beginning and end. When you sew the other side of the pouch, you'll need to flip it over in order to start on the folded edge. After stitching both sides with the longer stitch, I sewed over them again with my default size, which is 2.5, lining up the second set of seams right on top of the first and backstitching or locking the stitches at the beginning and end of the seam. Now we just need to trim off the excess fabric on the ends of the zipper. And there we are. We're almost done. We just need to turn everything right side out. Reach in and unzip the zipper the rest of the way. Poke out the corners carefully. Here's what the end of the zipper looks like. With the gusset tucked up inside, the pouch will lie flat. But if you open the gusset up, you'll get a wide base. And the pouch can stand up all by itself. Here we are, both sizes ready to use. Please consider joining my email list if you'd like to keep up with new tutorials and special events. I'll include a link in the description and in the comments. And if you'd like to explore more ways to use decorative stitches, here's some other videos you might enjoy. Happy quilting!